The silence screamed louder than any boo ever could, a prince lifting his hand for applause that never came, waving into a void so empty it felt like judgment itself. He's humiliated. Watch Harry wave to completely empty streets. And don't blink, because this isn't just awkward, it's devastating. There he was, suit crisp, jaw tight, shoulders squared like muscle memory told him the world still owed him a reaction. The cameras were ready. The moment was primed. This was supposed to look dignified, brave, resolute, a man standing up to the evil press that ruined his life. But reality had other plans. He stepped onto that pavement, turned like he's done 1,000 times before, lifted his hand in that polished royal wave, and met nothing. No crowd, no cheers, no murmurs. Just empty London streets swallowing him whole. That wave hung in the air like a question no one bothered to answer. And that's the part no one can spin. Because this wasn't just about a court case. This wasn't about phone hacking or tabloids or justice. This was about relevance, about whether the world still cares. And in that brutal, unscripted moment, the answer felt painfully clear. Inside the courthouse, the drama was thick enough to choke on. Wood-paneled walls, heavy doors, legal teams sharpening knives with polite smiles. This is where Harry wanted the story to live. Inside, where words are controlled and pain is narrated on his terms. Where he could rewind the clock and remind everyone that once upon a time, he was wronged. Deeply, violently, personally. Out came the ghost of Chelsea, the love story he still treats like an open wound. The woman he frames as the one who got away, not because it didn't work, but because the world supposedly took her from him. Phones hacked, messages stolen, private moments ripped apart and printed for profit. He sat there listening as his past was peeled open again, layer by layer, like proof of emotional innocence lost. But here's the thing no one inside that courtroom could ignore. The public wasn't listening anymore. Outside, there was no crowd hanging on every update. No loyal supporters holding signs, no sympathetic faces waiting to glimpse the wounded prince fighting the system. There was just traffic, tourists, indifference. That emptiness wasn't accidental. It was earned. Because this is what years of oversharing buys you. This is what happens when you tell the world every secret, every grudge, every private family fracture, and expect applause every time. The story starts to feel familiar, repetitive, transactional. Harry didn't just ask for sympathy once. He demanded it again and again. In interviews, in documentaries, in memoirs, in lawsuits stacked so high they blur together, each time insisting, this is the real truth. Each time expecting outrage on his behalf. But outrage has an expiration date. And the British public? They checked out. They didn't forget the boy behind the coffin. They didn't forget the grief. What they couldn't forgive was the tone shift. From wounded son to relentless accuser. From private pain to public demolition. From asking for space to selling the inside of the palace to the highest bidder while insisting it was all about healing. So when Harry claims this legal battle is about accountability, many don't hear courage anymore. They hear exhaustion. They see a man still fighting ghosts while refusing to admit the war already changed shape. The defense knows this. They're not just attacking evidence, they're attacking narrative, painting him not as a victim, but as a man who knew exactly how to use the press when it suited him and turned on it the moment it didn't. They're preparing to argue that this crusade isn't about justice, it's about control, about keeping the story alive, about staying centered in a drama the public has quietly moved past. And that wave? That lonely, unanswered wave? That's going to haunt him far more than any cross-examination. Because optics don't lie. Once upon a time, crowds camped overnight just to glimpse him. They screamed his name. They followed his every move. Now he walks into court like a man trying to convince himself the spotlight is still on, while the city barely looks up. No family flanking him. No royal backup. No united front, just a briefcase and a legal team and the weight of a reputation that shifted from beloved rebel to professional grievance. This is the cruel irony. He's fighting the press for ruining his life, while the public quietly decides they're done watching. That's what those empty streets really said. Not hatred, not rage. Worse, indifference. And indifference is the one thing royalty was never built to survive. When he left through a side entrance, the wave was gone, the performance was over, the cameras still clicked, but the moment had already passed. The image was locked in, a prince offering a royal gesture to absolutely no one, a visual epitaph for a chapter that may already be closed. Because you can sue newspapers, you can challenge headlines, you can relitigate your pain endlessly, but you can't force people to care forever. And that's the part no courtroom can fix. They didn't turn on him overnight. That's the part Harry still doesn't seem to understand. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was erosion. Slow, quiet, ruthless. While he keeps replaying the same origin story, the press ruined my love, the palace failed me, the system chewed me up, the public has been watching an entirely different movie. One where the hero never stops talking, never stops suing, never stops reopening wounds that everyone else is desperate to let scar over. And that's why those streets were empty. Because to the people who once adored him, this no longer feels like a fight for truth. It feels like a man trapped in a loop, mistaking repetition for relevance. Back in the day, Harry's chaos was charming. He was the rebel spare, the one who messed up, apologized, laughed it off, the prince who felt human. But somewhere along the way, that humanity hardened into accusation. Every story had a villain, every memory had a culprit. And slowly, subtly, the audience stopped seeing a survivor and started seeing a man who could never let anything go. The courtroom keeps becoming his stage, but the script never changes. He says this case is about phone hacking, but the undertone screams something else. Validation. Proof that he was right. That the world owes him an apology. That his version of events deserves a final, official stamp of righteousness. But here's the brutal truth no one around him seems willing to say out loud. The British public doesn't need convincing anymore. Not because they disagree with him on every detail, but because they've emotionally clocked out. They watched the Oprah interview, they watched the documentary, they read the book, they listened to the podcast confessions, they absorbed allegation after allegation, each one more intimate than the last. And at some point, it stopped feeling like bravery and started feeling like saturation. Even sympathy has a bandwidth. And Harry exceeded it. Every new lawsuit reopens the same emotional file. Every court appearance resurrects the same grievances. To him, it's unfinished business. To everyone else, it's déjà vu. The pain may be real, but the performance feels rehearsed. That's why the silence outside the courthouse mattered more than anything said inside. Because the public wasn't protesting him. They weren't shouting abuse. They weren't gathering in outrage. They simply didn't come. And absence, in this context, is louder than hostility. It signals something far more dangerous: irrelevance. Once the monarchy thrived on mystique, on restraint, on what was left unsaid, Harry shattered that mystique himself and now seems stunned that the magic didn't survive the exposure. He pulled back the curtain, invited everyone backstage, narrated every crack in the walls, and now wonders why the audience no longer gasps. Mystery creates power. Oversharing dissolves it. The tragedy is that Harry still thinks he's fighting the press. In reality, he's fighting time, and time is winning. The British public has moved into a different emotional era. They've recentered their loyalty. They've recalibrated what they expect from public figures. Duty, silence, service, those values regained weight after years of Sussex spectacle. And Harry, whether he realizes it or not, positioned himself on the wrong side of that cultural shift. So when he frames his lawsuits as moral crusades, many don't see courage. They see a man refusing to accept that the chapter ended without the applause he expected. And that hurts more than hatred ever could. Because hatred means engagement. It means passion. It means the story still matters. Indifference means the story is finished. The wave to empty streets wasn't just embarrassing, it was symbolic. A reflex from a former life, performed in a world that no longer responds to it. Like a man dialing a number that's been disconnected for years, still expecting someone to pick up. That image will outlive the legal arguments. It will outlast the verdicts. It will be replayed endlessly because it captures something raw and unfiltered the moment a public figure realizes, too late, that the audience has left the room. And here's the part that stings the most. This didn't have to happen. If Harry had left quietly, if he'd protected his boundaries without monetizing the fallout, if he'd chosen silence over spectacle even once, the sympathy would still be there. The door might still be open. The streets might not have been empty. But he chose exposure over discretion. He chose to narrate everything. And in doing so, he burned through the one resource royalty can't replenish: public goodwill. Now he stands alone, fighting a system that no longer sees him as its conscience, just its loudest critic. He's not exiled. He's not cancelled. He's something far more unsettling. He's been emotionally archived. The war with the press may continue on paper, but the war for hearts ended quietly, without ceremony, without noise, just a prince waving into nothing, finally confronted with the echo of his own choices. And the silence?